It was a cold, gloomy morning when I found out what my brother had done. I hadn't expected anything from the will my parents left behind, but when I got that call from my lawyer, my world came crashing down. "Lucy," she said, her voice low and careful, "your brother has taken everything. Your parents' estate, the family home, and every asset has been transferred into his name." My heart sank. I couldn't believe it. My brother, Mark, had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But this was something I never imagined. He'd always been clever, but I didn't think he could stoop so low. After all, we were family. Family didn't betray each other like that, right? I sat there in shock, staring at the lawyer's words on the paper, trying to process what was happening. The house my parents had worked so hard for, the business they had started from scratch, and the savings they had left for me, all gone. Mark had taken it all. I hadn't even been mentioned. It felt like the worst kind of betrayal, but there was something else, a nagging thought that kept pressing in my mind. I remembered faintly something my mother had once mentioned, a secret will, a will that wasn't supposed to be found unless something happened to them. It wasn't public knowledge, and she never shared it with me. It was only a passing comment, but something told me that this was the key. The days that followed were a blur. I didn't know where to turn or what to do. Mark was already parading around, acting as though he'd won. He sent me a message one night, almost as if he was gloating, saying, "It's all mine now, Lucy. You can't touch it. I don't know why you're so upset. You've always been the weak one in the family." His words stung. They hurt more than I expected. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about him thinking he had control over everything, including me. I decided I wasn't going to let him win. I had no choice but to dig deeper, to find that will, no matter what. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Mark had probably destroyed any evidence of the secret will, but I had to try. So, I started by going through every piece of paperwork my parents had left behind. It was in the attic, tucked away in dusty boxes, but I had to do it. Every corner of the house, every file, every drawer, I searched it all. And then, as luck would have it, I found a small, faded envelope hidden in the back of a closet. Inside, there it was, the secret will. It was handwritten, short, and direct. It clearly stated that I was to inherit the house, the business, and everything my parents had worked for. It also mentioned that Mark was not to receive anything unless I agreed to it, which I obviously hadn't. The shock was overwhelming. Mark had never even known about this document. If he had, he would have never dared to take what wasn't his. The next steps weren't easy. I had to contact my lawyer again, this time armed with the secret will. She was just as surprised as I was when I sent it to her. She assured me that this was going to change everything, but there was still so much work to be done. Mark was already celebrating his victory, but I wasn't about to let this go. I needed to act fast. We gathered evidence, called in the necessary people, and prepared for the legal battle ahead. I didn't tell anyone about the will just yet, not even our family. I knew Mark would try to turn everyone against me if he found out, so I kept my cards close to my chest. The more I got into it, the more I realized just how far Mark had gone to manipulate things. He had even forged signatures, hidden vital documents, and set up accounts in his name, thinking no one would catch on. But I caught it all. I had proof of everything. I didn't need to fight dirty. All I needed was the truth. I could already see the look on Mark's face when the court would finally hear about his lies. He had thought he could get away with it because he'd always been the favorite, but now it was all coming to light. And I wasn't going to let him get away with this. As the days passed, Mark started to notice something wasn't right. He called, demanded answers, and even threatened me. "You don't want to mess with me, Lucy," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. I will make sure you regret this." But I didn't flinch. I had something he didn't, a secret he wasn't aware of, a weapon that would end everything in one move. I wasn't scared of him. In fact, I was more confident than I'd been in a long time. The wheels of justice were slowly turning in my favor, and Mark had no idea what was coming. The next steps weren't easy. I had to contact my lawyer again, this time armed with the secret will. She was just as surprised as I was when I sent it to her. She assured me that this was going to change everything, but there was still so much work to be done. Mark was already celebrating his victory, but I wasn't about to let this go. I needed to act fast. We gathered evidence, called in the necessary people, and prepared for the legal battle ahead. I didn't tell anyone about the will just yet, not even our family. I knew Mark would try to turn everyone against me if he found out, so I kept my cards close to my chest. The more I got into it, the more I realized just how far Mark had gone to manipulate things. He had even forged signatures, hidden vital documents, and set up accounts in his name, thinking no one would catch on. But I caught it all. I had proof of everything. I didn't need to fight dirty. All I needed was the truth. I could already see the look on Mark's face when the court would finally hear about his lies. He had thought he could get away with it because he'd always been the favorite, but now it was all coming to light, and I wasn't going to let him get away with this. As the days passed, Mark started to notice something wasn't right. He called, demanded answers, and even threatened me. "You don't want to mess with me, Lucy," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I will make sure you regret this." But I didn't flinch. I had something he didn't, a secret he wasn't aware of, a weapon that would end everything in one move. I wasn't scared of him. In fact, I was more confident than I'd been in a long time. The wheels of justice were slowly turning in my favor, and Mark had no idea what was coming. The court date arrived, and Mark walked into the room with his usual cocky attitude. He had no idea that everything he had worked for was about to be destroyed. The judge listened intently as my lawyer presented the evidence, the forged documents, the hidden assets, and, of course, the secret will. Mark's face turned pale as he realized that I had been one step ahead of him all along. He tried to lie, to claim that I was fabricating the documents, but it was too late. The judge saw through his lies and ruled in my favor. I got everything back, the house, the business, the inheritance my parents had wanted me to have. And Mark? Well, he was left empty-handed, just like he deserved. It wasn't just about the money, though. The victory was about proving that I wasn't the weak one. Mark had underestimated me. He thought I would fall apart, that I would just accept his theft and move on. But I didn't. I fought for what was mine, for my family's legacy, and for myself. The court decision was just the beginning. My business began to thrive, and with the inheritance intact, I was able to secure a future for myself that I could be proud of. As for Mark, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had tried to claim some of the inheritance again, but every petition was dismissed. He was left with nothing. No family, no assets, and no support. The one thing he had counted on, his arrogance, had been his downfall. As time passed, I found peace. My business flourished, and I rebuilt everything my parents had left behind. Mark's attempts to ruin me had only made me stronger, and every time I looked at the inheritance, I didn't think about the betrayal. I thought about my parents' love, the values they'd instilled in me, and how I had turned their dream into my own. Mark had tried to destroy me, but in the end, he only made me more determined to succeed. And I did, on my terms. After the court ruling, Mark didn't just slink away into the shadows. No, he tried to make my life harder, and I knew he would. But what he didn't realize was that every move he made only dug him deeper into a hole. I had the truth, and truth has a way of coming to the surface no matter how hard you try to bury it. At first, I thought he might accept defeat and move on with his life. But instead, he became obsessed with the idea that he could still somehow get the inheritance back, or at least find a way to ruin my success. He began reaching out to distant relatives, our family friends, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, spreading rumors and painting me as the villain. According to him, I was the one who had stolen the inheritance. He tried to convince everyone that I had manipulated the situation, that I was trying to take away everything that should have been his. Some people, those who didn't know the full story, started to believe him. It made my blood boil. How could they fall for his lies? But then again, I wasn't surprised. Mark had always been the charming one, the one who knew how to spin a story to make himself look good. But I wasn't going to let his lies spread without a fight. Every time he sent a message, every time he made a call, I responded with nothing but the truth. I kept every text, every email, and every conversation on record. I learned quickly that when someone is willing to lie about something so important, it's crucial to have evidence on your side. I knew he was trying to provoke me, to get me to react, but I stayed calm. I didn't need to defend myself to the people who would never believe me. I just needed to focus on what was in front of me, my business, my future, and my peace of mind. And then came the phone call that changed everything. It was from my lawyer. She told me that Mark had hired a new lawyer and was planning to challenge the court's decision. He didn't believe it was final, and he was looking for ways to overturn the ruling. This wasn't over. I could almost hear the anger in my lawyer's voice. She had dealt with people like Mark before, and she wasn't about to let him get away with this. "Lucy, he's making a huge mistake," she said, "but we need to prepare for a long fight. This could get ugly." I wasn't scared, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Mark had always been resourceful when it came to getting what he wanted, but this time, he had underestimated me. This time, I was prepared. The will was clear, and my claim to the inheritance was ironclad. He had nothing left to hold on to, no matter how much he tried to twist the facts. And now, with his constant challenges, I had an opportunity to expose him for who he really was. I spent the next few weeks gathering everything I could: financial records, communications, any evidence that would help me strengthen my case against Mark. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to make sure there was no way he could ever come after me again. I kept my focus sharp, ignoring all the gossip and rumors he was spreading. But the one thing that really kept me going was knowing that he wasn't going to get away with it. He thought he could take what was mine. He thought he could control everything, just like he had always done. But he was wrong. This time, I was in control. Mark's actions only made people question him more. Those who had once believed in him were starting to see through the facade. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction every time I heard about how his attempts to manipulate others were backfiring. It was like watching someone who had been so sure of themselves slowly crumble under the weight of their own lies. And every time he sent another angry message or made another call, I simply forwarded it to my lawyer. It felt good to know that with every passing day, Mark was losing ground. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the final hearing. Mark, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen him, showed up in court, ready to fight. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a thin veneer of desperation. The lawyer he had hired seemed out of his depth, fumbling through his papers as though trying to find a loophole that didn't exist. I could see the fear in Mark's eyes. He knew it was over, but he refused to admit it. The court saw through his claims and dismissed his arguments one by one. It was clear that the inheritance had always been mine, and there was nothing he could do to change that. As the judge made the final ruling, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Mark had lost. The estate, the house, and everything else that had been taken from me had been rightfully returned. Mark had tried to play the system, but in the end, it was his own deceitful actions that had led to his downfall. The judge even made a point of noting the way Mark had used the legal system to further his lies, and how his behavior had been nothing short of manipulation. It was like the final chapter of a book I had been waiting to close. And as I walked out of that courtroom, I couldn't help but smile. The battle was over, and I had won. The relief didn't last long. As soon as I stepped out of the courthouse, I was greeted by the aftermath. Mark wasn't done yet. I expected as much, but I didn't anticipate how relentless he would be. He started to spread rumors even more aggressively, claiming that the court had made a mistake, that the will wasn't valid, and that I had somehow rigged the system. But as the days passed, I noticed something remarkable. People were starting to see him for what he was, a desperate man clinging to a false narrative. I didn't respond to him directly. There was no need to. My lawyer had advised me to stay quiet, to let the legal process unfold without giving Mark any fuel for his fire. But that didn't mean I could avoid the whispers. At family gatherings, people would ask me about Mark's latest claim, and I'd simply reply with the truth. I'd tell them about the secret will, the court ruling, and how everything had played out. It was clear to anyone who was paying attention that Mark had been caught in his own lies. Still, some people were willing to believe his version of events, but it wasn't nearly as many as he had hoped. I focused on what mattered most: my business. My parents had built this from the ground up, and I wasn't about to let Mark's antics derail it. In fact, in some strange way, his efforts to discredit me only fueled my desire to make the business even more successful. People started to recognize the strength it took to overcome such a betrayal. My boutique, which had once been a small family business, began to grow. Word spread quickly about how I had handled the entire situation with grace and dignity. And soon, I had customers coming in just to support me. Business started booming. I brought in new products, expanded my staff, and made my brand a symbol of resilience. The success felt sweeter with every step forward. I could almost feel my parents' presence in the store, like they were watching over me, proud of how I had handled the situation. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to be sinking deeper into a pit of his own making. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he had gone through several jobs since the legal battle ended, none of them lasting long. His debts were piling up, and his attempts to manipulate others were becoming more obvious and less effective. I never reached out to Mark. I didn't need to. My lawyer had made it clear that I was under no obligation to engage with him. He had crossed the line, and the legal consequences would follow. Still, I wasn't prepared for the emotional toll his actions took on me. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about family, betrayal, and the loss of trust. How could someone who shared so many years of my life do something so cold-hearted? I found myself questioning everything I had ever known about our relationship. And yet, I knew I couldn't let his betrayal define me. I had too much to lose. Mark's bitterness only escalated as he continued to try to fight me for what he thought was rightfully his. He tried to claim a portion of the boutique, suggesting that he had helped build it with moral support. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same person who had always belittled my work, called it a hobby, and never once offered help. But now, after everything, he thought he could walk in and claim half of it? The nerve! I forwarded his demands to my lawyer, who, as always, reassured me that there was nothing he could do. But the real blow to Mark came when he tried to use social media to sway public opinion. He posted a long, rambling message about how I had betrayed the family and how he had been robbed of what was rightfully his. He tagged our relatives, our old family friends, even the few mutual acquaintances we still had. It was his last-ditch effort to convince the world that I had wronged him. At first, I thought about responding, but then I realized something. I didn't need to. He was making himself look worse with every post. People could see through his lies. The support for me only grew stronger as time went on. The day Mark's social media post exploded was the day I realized just how much I had grown. While he was playing his pity card, I was building a legacy. My boutique was featured in local magazines, and I was invited to share my story at a women's entrepreneurship seminar. My parents' dream was no longer a memory. It was a thriving reality. And I was proud of what I had accomplished, even more than I had ever been before. One afternoon, a woman came into my boutique. She had a hesitant smile on her face, as if she wasn't sure whether to approach me. After a moment of browsing, she walked up to the counter and asked me if I was Lucy Harrison, the same Lucy from the media story. I nodded, unsure of where this was going. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "Your story, it gave me the strength to leave a toxic relationship. I saw how you handled everything, how you didn't let anyone tear you down. You showed me that I could stand up for myself too." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. It was about showing others that they didn't have to settle for anything less than what they deserved. Her gratitude made all the pain worth it. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about an inheritance or a fight with Mark. It was about helping others find the strength to reclaim their own lives. Mark, on the other hand, continued to spiral. The man who had once had it all, who thought he could take everything from me, was now struggling to stay afloat. He was living in a small apartment, far from the life he had once flaunted. I heard he tried dating again, but his attempts fell flat. No one wanted to be with a man who couldn't take responsibility for his own actions. And to make things worse for him, his past caught up with him. His former employer investigated his work history, uncovering misconduct, and his once promising career came to a halt. He had no one to blame but himself. As the months passed, I kept moving forward. My boutique expanded, and I found new ways to reach customers. The legacy of my parents' hard work lived on, not just in the business, but in the lessons they had taught me about resilience and standing up for what's right. Mark's face slowly disappeared from my thoughts, replaced by the bright future I was building. And while I occasionally heard about his latest failures, I no longer cared. I had won the battle. And more importantly, I had found the peace and strength I had been searching for all along. The months after the court ruling brought a surprising sense of peace. Mark's constant attempts to challenge the inheritance faded as the reality of his situation sank in. His life seemed to unravel in front of him, and while I didn't wish him harm, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Watching him struggle to maintain his position, watching him fall from the pedestal he had once sat on, was a bittersweet reminder of how far I had come. Meanwhile, my business continued to thrive. The boutique, once a small family-owned store, had now grown into a well-known establishment. Customers came from all over to support me, not just because of the quality of the products, but because they saw my story reflected in theirs. Women, sometimes even men, came in, sharing their own stories of overcoming betrayal, adversity, or personal struggles. It was clear to me that I wasn't just selling clothes anymore. I was selling empowerment, resilience, and the strength to rebuild. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could give back to the world. I had learned so much in such a short amount of time. The lessons my parents had taught me about hard work and perseverance were now more relevant than ever. They had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. They had built this business from the ground up, and I had to ensure their legacy lived on. I worked tirelessly to grow it, hiring new employees, launching online sales, and expanding into new locations. The once small boutique became a symbol of what it meant to fight for what's yours, to protect what you love, and to never back down. But as my success grew, Mark's bitterness continued to simmer in the background. It wasn't that I wanted to think about him anymore, but every now and then, something would remind me of him. A message from a family member, a social media post. It was impossible to escape the fact that he was still out there, still blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in his life. He was never going to admit his mistakes, never going to take responsibility for his actions. And I realized, after all this time, that I wasn't the one who needed to seek closure. He was. One day, as I was arranging some new arrivals at the boutique, I saw a familiar face walk through the door. I was so caught off guard that I almost didn't recognize her at first. It was Mark's ex-girlfriend, the one he had been with during all of this mess. She looked different now, more confident, a little older, but still carrying the same sense of uncertainty I had once seen in her eyes. I had heard a few things about her in passing, but seeing her standing there, clearly unsure of whether to approach, made me realize how much time had passed. She took a deep breath before walking over to the counter. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice almost timid. "When I first met Mark, he painted such a picture of you. He told me you were cold, controlling, and selfish, but after everything that happened, I started to see him for who he really was. I thought I'd be different, that he'd change, but he didn't, and I wanted to come here and thank you for showing me that I didn't have to stay in that toxic situation." I was taken aback. I had never expected her to come to me like this, to admit that she had been misled and wrong. But in that moment, I realized that I wasn't the only one Mark had manipulated. He had spun a web of lies around everyone he touched, trying to make himself the victim. And for a brief moment, I felt sorry for her. She had been just another pawn in his game.
"It wasn't just you, you know," I said softly, keeping my voice calm and even. "Mark is good at making people think he's the hero of every story, but the truth always comes out eventually. I just didn't think it would take this long for some people to see it." We talked for a little while longer, and it was strange to hear how much her perspective had shifted. It wasn't just her that had changed, though. I had changed too. I had learned the power of not holding grudges, of not letting someone else's toxic behavior define how I lived my life. I had learned that it was okay to let go, to focus on what mattered most: myself, my business, and the people who truly supported me. After she left, I stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. It was clear to me now that Mark's betrayal was not just about money or inheritance. It was about control. It was about him trying to break me down, to prove that I was nothing without him. And for a while, it worked. But now, looking at where I stood, I realized how much stronger I had become. I had reclaimed everything that mattered. I had won in the end, not just because of the inheritance, but because I had remained true to who I was. Still, even with all the growth, the scars remained. I could feel them in quiet moments, in the way I would sometimes second-guess myself when things got tough. But I also knew that I had survived. I had made it through, and I wasn't going to let Mark, or anyone else, take that away from me. Life was too short to let bitterness control me. It was too short to be weighed down by someone else's failures. The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a place of healing, of strength, and of new beginnings. It had become a symbol of everything I had fought for, and everything I had earned. And the best part? It was just the beginning. There was so much more to come. And as for Mark, he was still out there somewhere, clinging to his old lies. But I no longer cared. He had underestimated me, and now he had to live with the consequences. I had my future. I had my family's legacy. And most importantly, I had my peace. It wasn't long before my life began to feel like it had fully shifted into a new chapter. The boutique had grown beyond anything I had imagined, attracting more attention and gaining loyal customers who respected the journey I had been through. I had become a figure in the local community, someone people looked to for advice on building their own businesses or overcoming personal adversity. But there was still something lingering in the back of my mind. I had moved on, and I had won the battle. But the question remained: was Mark truly finished with me? Could he ever let go of his obsession? The rumors that had once filled the air, the stories he'd spread about me, all seemed to have faded, but the occasional whispers still reached my ears. People would tell me how Mark had tried to contact certain mutual acquaintances, always asking if they'd heard from me or if there was any way he could make things right. It wasn't that he was seeking reconciliation.
It was something far more selfish. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was simply trying to find a way back into my life, to salvage something for himself, even if it was just to make himself feel like he had won, even a little. One day, my lawyer called again. This time, it was to inform me that Mark had filed another petition, requesting to revisit the divorce settlement and inheritance ruling. The timing was unbelievable. It had been months since the final court decision, and Mark had already been shut down multiple times, yet here he was, trying again. This petition wasn't about getting back what was his. This time, it was a desperate attempt to drag me through the mud, to tarnish my hard-earned success. He wanted to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. It was clear to me now that this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about his pride, and more than anything, his inability to admit defeat. I couldn't help but shake my head. How far could he go? How many more times would he try to manipulate the system, to make me the villain in his story? It wasn't just about the inheritance at this point. Mark's ego had been bruised in ways he couldn't accept. He thought he had won, but every time he tried to take another shot, he only revealed his desperation. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I had to put an end to it once and for all. I called my lawyer right away, and together we went over the details of his petition. It was full of the same old baseless arguments, accusing me of manipulating the system and claiming that the will should be re-examined because of supposed unforeseen circumstances. It didn't make sense, and it was clear he had nothing solid to back up his case. We both agreed this was simply a tactic to annoy me, to try to get me to react. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I refused to let him drag me into another battle. Instead, I decided to take control once again. My lawyer helped me prepare an airtight response, making sure we had every piece of evidence to show that the court decision had been final, that Mark's claims were not only baseless, but also an abuse of legal proceedings. It wasn't about playing dirty. It was about ensuring that justice was done, and showing Mark that his attempts to undermine me were futile. The final hearing arrived, and Mark was there, sitting in the same smug position he always had. But something was different. His confidence was now more fragile than ever. As the judge listened to his claims, it became painfully clear that he had no leg to stand on. Each of his arguments was refuted by facts and legal documentation. The judge, who had seen everything unfold over the months, wasted no time dismissing his petition. Mark's last chance to reclaim anything from this battle had officially been extinguished. As I left the courtroom that day, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction you get from winning a battle. It was the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you had done everything right, from knowing you hadn't let your past control your future. Mark's obsession with the past had finally caught up with him, and all he had left were his regrets. He couldn't escape the consequences of his own actions. The months following that final decision were quiet. Mark stopped trying to reach out. The phone calls, the emails, the desperate pleas to revisit the settlement, all of it ended. It was like the air had been cleared. And though I wasn't proud of the way things had gone, I had come to realize that I had fought for what was rightfully mine. I had stood up for myself, for my parents' legacy, and for my future. And there was nothing more powerful than that. My business flourished even further after that, and I began to gain recognition beyond the local community. People wanted to know how I had turned my personal tragedy into success, how I had managed to keep my head up despite everything Mark had thrown at me. I didn't have all the answers, but I shared what I could, about resilience, about protecting what's yours, and most of all, about the importance of never underestimating your own strength. Mark, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. I heard he had moved far away, trying to rebuild his life, but the truth was that I didn't care anymore. The chapter of my life that had once been dominated by him was now over. I had built something stronger than he could ever tear down, and I was finally free. Free from the weight of betrayal, free from the echoes of his manipulation, and free to live the life I had worked so hard to create. And as I stood in my boutique one afternoon, looking out at the bustling streets, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. As the years continued to pass, the echoes of my past became quieter, and the steady hum of success filled its place. I had become a staple in the local business scene, known not only for the boutique, but for the strength and resilience I had shown during the most difficult time of my life. I had learned that success wasn't just about financial growth or recognition. It was about maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself no matter the odds. Every decision, every choice I made had been shaped by that one pivotal moment when I chose to rise above the betrayal and take control of my own fate. But there were still moments when the shadows of my past would creep in, especially when I least expected it. I'd catch myself thinking of Mark, wondering what he was doing, where he was, or how his life had turned out. It wasn't out of any lingering affection or curiosity, but more out of a sense of closure. I couldn't deny that his actions had defined so much of my past, and sometimes I wondered if he ever thought about how things had played out. Did he regret it? Did he ever realize that his decisions had cost him far more than just the inheritance? I never really got the answers to those questions. But as I stood at the front of my boutique one afternoon, preparing for the grand opening of our latest location, I realized something profound. It didn't matter. What mattered was where I was now. Mark, in all his arrogance, had underestimated me, and in doing so, had unintentionally propelled me toward a future I hadn't even imagined for myself. I had turned my pain into something greater than I could have ever imagined. I had built a life I could be proud of, one that was mine and mine alone. The new boutique was a symbol of that. It was more than just another store. It was a declaration that I had taken everything Mark had tried to destroy and turned it into something beautiful. As I walked through the new space, inspecting the layout and admiring the sleek new designs, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. This was my empire. I had earned it, and no one could take it away from me. The event was a huge success. Customers lined up outside, eager to get a glimpse of the new location, and the media coverage brought in new clients from all over. But more than anything, it was the people who came up to me to offer their congratulations, their support, and their admiration that meant the most. Many of them had followed my journey from the very beginning, and to hear them speak about how my story had inspired them was incredibly humbling. It wasn't just about building a business anymore, it was about building a legacy. One particular moment stood out to me. A woman approached me, looking slightly nervous but with a warm smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "I've been following your story for years, and your strength has gotten me through the toughest time of my life. I was in an abusive relationship, and I didn't think I could ever leave. But then I read about what you went through, how you rebuilt yourself, and it gave me the courage to walk away and start over." Her words took me by surprise, and for a brief moment, I found myself speechless. I didn't know how to respond to such raw gratitude, but I knew in my heart that this was what it was all about. This was why I had kept going. Not for the money, not for the recognition, but to show others that they too could rise above whatever had tried to hold them down. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of everyone who had ever faced adversity and chosen to overcome it. As the night wore on and the crowd slowly began to thin, I took a moment to stand outside, looking out at the city lights that had always felt so distant when I was struggling. The world seemed so much smaller now, more accessible, and more within my reach than it had ever been before. I had built something real, something lasting, and I knew that no matter what Mark or anyone else had tried to do to stop me, I was exactly where I was meant to be. It wasn't just the boutique that had expanded. It was my world. I had become a mentor, a leader, someone people came to for advice and inspiration. I had taken the pain, the betrayal, and the heartbreak and used it to fuel my growth. I had transformed my life into something that couldn't be shaken by the past. Mark's actions no longer held any power over me. He was just a distant figure in a story that no longer mattered. I had the business. I had my family's legacy. And more importantly, I had my peace. The final chapter of my journey wasn't written by him. It was written by me. And as I stood there, watching the last of the guests leave, I knew that the best was yet to come. Mark had underestimated me, but that had been his biggest mistake. Because now, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, standing tall, stronger than ever, and ready for whatever came next. The future was mine, and nothing would ever take it from me again. The years that followed were a whirlwind of achievements. My boutique chain expanded even further, and with each new location, I could feel the weight of my past fall further away. The success of the business became a reflection of the lessons I had learned, not just about entrepreneurship, but about life itself. Every challenge, every setback, every moment of doubt had shaped me into the woman I had become. And I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Looking back, I realized how much I had grown. When everything first fell apart, I thought I was losing it all. My family, my inheritance, my sense of security. I thought I would never be able to rebuild. But now, I understood that what I had lost wasn't nearly as important as what I had gained. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also given me a chance to reinvent myself. It had forced me to see the strength I had buried within me, the resilience I didn't know I possessed. The new chapter of my life wasn't just defined by my success in business. It was also about the way I had learned to let go. The emotional baggage of the past was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned how to forgive, not Mark, but myself. I had forgiven myself for being hurt, for allowing someone else to take so much from me. I had forgiven myself for doubting my own worth. And with that forgiveness came freedom. I remember one evening, a few months after the grand opening of the latest boutique, I received a call that I never expected. It was from my lawyer, and for a moment, my heart skipped a beat. Was there something else Mark was trying? Had he come back for one last attempt to disrupt everything I had worked so hard for? But no, the call was about something else. The lawyer told me that Mark had filed for bankruptcy, that he had finally hit rock bottom. It was a sobering moment. I wasn't happy to hear it, but I couldn't deny the sense of justice I felt. Mark had spent so many years manipulating people, chasing his own selfish desires, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. He had lost everything. His family had distanced themselves from him, and he had no one to turn to. His pride had been his downfall, and now he was alone. That evening, I thought about all the years we had spent together as a family, the times we had laughed, fought, and shared memories. I thought about the person I had once believed him to be, and the person he had become. But more than anything, I thought about the woman I had become, stronger, wiser, and unrecognizable from the girl who had been so devastated by his betrayal. I realized then that I had already won. I had already achieved everything I had ever dreamed of, not because of him, but despite him. As the years passed, my boutique chain grew into a well-respected brand. I expanded into luxury accessories, collaborated with designers, and began receiving offers to franchise across the country. What had started as a simple dream had become an empire. A legacy not just for me, but for my parents, whose love and hard work had laid the foundation for everything I had accomplished. They had always believed in me, and now I could finally see what they had seen in me all along. I kept Mark's final text framed in my office, not as a reminder of the pain he had caused, but as a symbol of everything I had overcome. It wasn't the last thing he had said to me, but it was the last thing that had mattered. His cruel words about my age, my shop, and my future had been meant to hurt me. Instead, they had become the fuel that pushed me to prove him wrong. And now, as I stood at the helm of a thriving business, I couldn't help but smile. It had all come full circle. Mark's betrayal had set everything in motion, and without it, I might not have had the courage to chase my dreams. I owed him nothing, but I was grateful for what he had inadvertently given me, the chance to reinvent myself, to reclaim my life, and to build something greater than I had ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a new notification, but this time, it wasn't from a client or a supplier. It was from a former employee, someone who had once been a part of my small team, but had gone on to build her own business. Her message was simple. "Lucy, your story inspired me to take the leap and start my own company. I just wanted you to know that." I smiled as I read her message, a deep sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. This was the real reward, not the business accolades, not the money, but the knowledge that my journey had touched others, that my story had inspired them to take their own leaps of faith. The chapter on Mark was long over, but my story was far from finished. I had learned that the best revenge isn't about seeking payback. It's about building something lasting, something meaningful, and something that can't be taken away. It's about living on your own terms, no matter what anyone else thinks or does. And that's exactly what I had done. I had turned my pain into power, my heartbreak into success, and my struggles into triumph. And in the end, I realized that the greatest victory of all wasn't just about winning against Mark. It was about winning for myself, and finally, living the life I deserved. It had been a long, difficult road, but I had come out on top, and no one, not Mark, nor anyone else, could ever take that away from me again.